This is Andy.
And this is Matt.
And you're listening to
The Hop Podcast with no name.
What a dumb name.
It's so stupid. Episode. Oh, you can't start laughing to start the episode because the last thing you said before I hit record was, I guess I'll just ask Santa for it. And you were somewhat serious. Which I guess gives us if anyone ever wonders when this episode's recorded, well, now you know about when it's recorded. That you'd be asking Santa for a gift.
Yes. I was just saying we need new microphones. And you were saying, well, we could just get them. And my children have been writing notes to Santa. So my first thought was, I guess we'll just ask Santa for it. But I said it so seriously that I cracked myself up.
Yep. Yeah. Yes. Anyway, why we're actually here is that we decided to do another mini series, your favorite, about in the spirit of the last episode, we talked about slides, about a slide we almost always use in training, which has three key ideas about what hop is. So I'll let you explain kind of what the thought was behind this mini series that we're starting.
Yeah. One of the ideas that we tossed out in a podcast many episodes ago, where we were just trying to think about what would be helpful for people. And we threw out the idea of maybe we should do small sort of 5-minute episodes talking about, various pieces of what hop is so that people could use it at the beginning of a meeting, or if they wanted to introduce a new leader to the concept. And actually the feedback that we got is that people weren't sure whether 5-minute episodes would be enough. So we were trying to think of a different way of helping people really wrestle with the concepts of what hop is. And we realized that in class, we use this slide that you mentioned. And we always describe it for anyone who's never heard of the subject before. We say it's an interesting cross between organizational psychology, systems thinking, complexity science, and sometimes I say, and restorative justice. So we say 3 or 4 different pieces of a puzzle. And so we thought maybe we should do a mini series on each of those pieces to try to explain why it's a combination of those 4 items, 4, areas of study, and how each of the shifts in thought kind of affect the way that we do business.
So sort of like a from to situation for each.
A bit idea. Of a from to, depending upon how organized we are with our thoughts.
So that'll, I regret bringing that up. That'll never happen.
But enough of a from to that maybe it'll help people sort of categorize some of what hop is, because it is it's a large body of knowledge that is intertwined with how we've done business in the past. And I, at least personally, I found it very difficult to wrap my arms around what the subject was. And it took several years for me to even be able to articulate that it falls into these categories. And so maybe explaining the categories separately and giving, a bit of education behind it, but then some examples and how the thought process then shows up in how we do business might be helpful for people who are trying to use the concepts or explain them to other people. So that's our thought.
Yeah. And we're going to give it a go. One step at a time. And we decided to start with complexity, which is my favorite subject. I think I've said that on episodes before. It is definitely my favorite thing to talk about and mostly make you talk about.
So as the history major, complexity is it's actually probably should be more part of the discussion of history than it is. I would imagine.
Yeah. Yes, I will try to
really it should be
some good examples as we're going through it. But yes, I definitely agree.
Yeah. It took me a little bit of trying to understand this subject to not only understand complexity, but really understand how much the thought process has guided what hop is. And I remember one of the first times that I was introduced to the concept. Dr. Todd Conklin, he was at the facility that I was working at. And he played a game that he plays a lot. So many people who listen to this, if you've been in a class with him, you've probably played this game. And it's the number counting game. If you haven't heard of what it is, basically picture the class, we're standing in a circle, and he gives us a series of instructions, and we have to be able to count from 1 to a number he gives, which is greater than the number of people in the room. And each person has to speak independently, so you can't speak over somebody, and the numbers have to be in order, but there can't be a discernible pattern in who's counting. And then he tells you to go and start counting. And the entire reason for this game is actually to demonstrate what complexity looks like, of the fact that even just a few different requirements to execute a task with a number of people that have to execute it together has created a complex system. And I remember the first time that we played the game, and even the second time when I saw him present again, I went up to him and I was like, I don't know if it's a good game, which is, of course, something that I would say.
It's very presumptuous.
And he said, well, why? He's like, it's one of the best and simplest explanations of complexity that he could think of. He's like, if you come up with a better one, tell me. And the reason at the time I didn't think it was a good game is because I remember, as being a participant, I remembered thinking that we were going to have to come up with a system to execute the game. We were going to have to write our own rules and do something differently. But I didn't jump in when the game started because I didn't want to, I don't know, I didn't want to look like a know-it-all, or I didn't want to, stand out in the class. I socially didn't want to put myself in a different position than just a class member. So even though I was thinking aggressively, we're going to have to do something different, I didn't jump in to make the game successful on the first trial. And so it took 3 or 4 iterations for someone to say something. And I remember thinking, well, this game actually demonstrates more that there's, socially a problem of speaking up than it does with complexity. And it took me a long time to learn that actually that is part of complexity, like the dynamic between people, the willingness to have conversation, and the fact that those pieces, not only the individual aspects of the system of the game, but also the aspects of the interrelationship between the people, it's the coupling of all of those pieces together that is part of the lifeblood of what complexity is. And it took a long time for me to realize that it was holistically, even the social dynamics became part of that example. But I think, Matt, it might be helpful for us to kind of cover some of the basics of complexity with people to make it make sense. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I find that starting at the beginning is helpful. I mean, I also think that I don't think we've used this analogy before on the podcast, or this example before on the podcast, so it'll be good to hear. But also it's simple enough that if someone wanted to take it with them and use it somewhere else, they could. So it's probably a good place for us to start.
Okay. One of the things that we do when we're teaching this in a classroom setting is we ask people to do a thought experiment. And the thought experiment is, if we somehow could make it so every single person following, for example, written instruction at work did it perfectly, meaning they didn't make errors, they didn't take shortcuts, they executed the written instruction as the written instructions were intended. They never got tired. They never mixed 2 things up. They repetitively could do the same thing over and over and over again with tremendous accuracy. So, I mean, picture people turning into robots. If we could snap our fingers and suddenly every person within an organization turned into robots, what would happen? And the difference in answer is actually fairly helpful in outlining the difference in thought process. So some people think, they picture it and they think, well, things would be slow. They'd be very slow, but they'd be methodical. And because they're methodical, well, then we would create good quality product. Maybe we don't meet customers' requirements in terms of speed of how much we make of the product, but we'd make good quality product.
And there'd be no rework.
Right. We wouldn't have any rework at all. People wouldn't get injured. And so it might not be creative, right? People wouldn't be able to come up with creative solutions, but it would be sort of plodding along. If you think the tortoise and the hare, this is the tortoise, and we're going to execute it perfectly.
And that becomes sort of the first camp. It's usually the first group of people that speak up, and then some percentage of the room rallies behind that, like, yeah, that's what we would do.
Yeah. And then usually that camp, the only thing they get stuck on is this idea of continuous improvement would be hard, right? So we wouldn't be creative and we wouldn't have continuous improvement. And then there's this other camp. Now, if we're physically in a room together, you can just watch people's faces just change as they're listening to this slow plodding tortoise analogy, and they're just shaking their head aggressively no. And when you ask them what their thoughts are, they say nothing would get done. But it's usually it, right? Like that's the end of the explanation.
Yeah, it depends on how much thought they really put to this. Sometimes it's nothing will get done. Sometimes it's this place would burn down. Sometimes it's everything would break. It's some variation of that.
Yeah, but it's usually like one sentence, right? Well, nothing would get done, or things would go poorly.
Yeah.
And the difference in that thought process is the fact that actually each camp is picturing the world as a different type of system. If you picture it as the slow plodding tortoise, you're probably picturing the world around you as something called an ordered system. If instead the thought process is we'd be lucky if everything ground to a halt without catastrophic failure happening along the way, if you're way on the other end of the spectrum, then you're probably thinking about the world as a highly complex adaptive system. And that's those two ways of picturing the world around us actually direct quite a bit of what we think is important. So as a leadership team, if we picture the world as an ordered system, we're going to gravitate towards looking for weaknesses in our process in a certain way. We're going to gravitate towards asking questions in a certain way. We're going to gravitate towards doing incident investigations in a certain way. And if you're picturing it in the other camp, in the complex adaptive system camp, those responses tend to change. What you think is important tends to change, and the types of questions you would be interested in tends to change. And so it's probably beneficial for us to talk about the difference between ordered systems and complex adaptive systems. And from there, it'd be a little bit easier to explain how the thought process changes when your mental model changes.
I'm on board. And seeing as I have creative control over this podcast, that is the most important person you need to convince.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So just some basics. An ordered system. There are simple ordered systems, and there's complicated ordered systems, and there's a whole spectrum in between. An example of a simple ordered system, in this case, a mechanical example, would be something like a set of gears.
Or like a door hinge.
Or like a mouse trap.
Doorknob.
A stapler.
I can keep going with door stuff. We know this to be true. I have a lot of door examples, but most things in a door
most door-related paraphernalia appear to be simple ordered systems.
Yes.
But what's interesting about a simple ordered system and why it falls into that category is that the simplest of forms, it only has a sort of one dynamic of cause and effect. You have a cause and you have an immediate effect, and there's not a lot going on in between. Because they're mechanical, these are following the laws of physics, Newtonian physics. And that means that they are repeatable. They are completely knowable. You can calculate the input and output. And what's fascinating about them is if anything breaks, you can find the infamous root cause, right? You can find the thing that broke. And if it's a simple ordered system, it's really easy to figure out what broke because there's usually only one mechanism you're dealing with. You can find the thing that broke, you can fix it, and it will work again. You can also recreate the failure. So you can break the same thing and it will break in the same way. That's a simple ordered system. when you add a lot of simple ordered systems together, you get complicated ordered systems. So you can picture an engine, or you can picture a piece of machinery. And the more complicated it gets, the more interactions there are between parts, but they're all still connected through known mathematical models, right? So if we're still talking about a mechanical example here, then we're still talking about Newtonian physics. It is predictable, it's knowable, it is repeatable. You can calculate the output of what's going to happen. And you can do that in a way where failure becomes pretty obvious as to what would happen when something fails. And if you do find, for example, let's say the bucket of an excavator, the bucket stops working, you can trace back what failed, and you can fix it, and you can fix it so that it works again. And once again, you can break it. So you can repeat the failure and figure out exactly what is failing that makes the bucket fail. And all of those pieces in the puzzle are cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect in a very linear fashion, which makes troubleshooting pretty easy in comparison to other things, because all you have to really find is one of the things that failed in that chain, and it's connected to everything else, right? So if you find one thing that's broken, you can trace back where it came from, and you can trace it all the way to the visible part of the failure. So those are ordered systems. What's tricky is that we don't live or work inside of a machine. Once we step into a work process, so you could picture, for example, that same excavator now doing work with a person, executing a task within the constraints and requirements of an organization. We've now stepped into something called a complex adaptive system. And the rules here are completely different. And a big piece of why the rules are completely different has to do with the number of variables and the fact that they interact with each other. So if we're just picturing, for example, let's picture an excavator digging up a tree, or the number of variables that exist just in that one piece of a process are enormous. Everything from the operator, if they've worked with this specific excavator before, like this serial number or this brand, is it functioning the same way that it functioned the day before? Are they working with their crew? Are they covering down for someone? What's the root structure of this tree? What are the soil conditions? What's happening around them? What type of sleep did they get? What mental models are they using to actually execute the task? If we spent, I don't know, how much time do we have left in this podcast, Matt?
Yeah, about 2 minutes or so. Yeah, 2-3 minutes. I mean, we can go as long as we want, right? But for everyone else's sake, about 2 or 3 minutes.
I don't think even if we could speak as quickly as we could and had an entire list in front of us, we could absolutely not cover all of the different elements of variability that are just happening in this one piece of the process. And once we're in a place where there is that much variability happening, and the fact that each of those pieces or many of those pieces can then interact with each other, the pattern of cause and effect changes dramatically. It is no longer linear. So it's no longer cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. Actually, the best model that we have to describe it sort of simply at this point in time is a perfect storm. So when things go bad, things go poorly in a complex adaptive system, it's usually a combination of really normal stuff that kind of all goes wrong at the same time, the same way we might describe a perfect storm. The model of failure is different. And actually, it's really hard to recreate the same type of failure because there's so many different pieces interacting with each other. It's not as simple as we're going to make this bucket not work. It's a bunch of pieces of a puzzle that have to come together in the same way. The best explanation that I had to use to wrap my head around what this looks like is actually weather. Currently, in this very moment, the weather prediction for my area is anything from no snow, like 1 inch of rain precipitation, to 9 to 10 inches. And it's oscillating wildly between the two of those, depending
for
upon
tomorrow.
when For tomorrow.
This is for,
yes,
so this
very
is for
specifically.
24
for
hours
tomorrow.
from now.
And it's oscillating wildly between those various options and everything in between at this moment in time, because we're right on the cusp of the potential of this cold front coming through and whether or not the temperature is going to be the right temperature. I mention that because
I just want to add in that
yes.
we live about 30 miles apart on a map.
And what's your weather for tomorrow?
Some rain, barely any snow, easy day.
And why this is fascinating is actually because weather is a complex physical system. So not a complex adaptive system, but a complex physical system. A lot of different ingredients have to come together to create a weather pattern. Like even if we were picturing a tornado or picturing a hurricane, the number of different elements that have to coalesce in the same time and the same place to create that weather pattern is fairly high. And although we have continuous monitoring for weather, we still aren't great at predicting it. It's not the same thing as a mechanical prediction of how something is going to fail. We struggle to predict what's going to happen the next day. Now, the closer we get to the weather occurring, the more accurate our predictions get. But that's just because the degree of variability starts to shrink. And this idea of weather as a complex physical system is interesting. I'd say the fact that we live in a complex adaptive system is even more interesting, because what that means is, I don't know, picture all the ingredients you need for a tornado and picture them, picture them swirling around in the air for lack of a better way of describing it. The adaptive part, the fascinating aspect of humanity is that there's a person standing in the middle of those ingredients trying to make it so a tornado doesn't happen. Meaning the ingredients for a really, really bad day, the ingredients for a bad failure, the ingredients for this metaphorical tornado can all be there. And yet the human, in our amazing ability to adapt, can make it so the ingredients don't come together. That is a very different mental model than picturing everything being fixed and repeatable and knowable and easy to calculate, as though we're living inside of a machine. And I think maybe for next episode, Matt, we try to give an example that's not weather related and maybe not backhoe related of what it actually means to be in a complex adaptive system. Because once we can compare and contrast ordered systems and complex adaptive systems, I think it becomes pretty obvious how we study, for example, failure would change, or why when we're looking for brittleness in a system, why we would be looking at things differently than if we were picturing the world around us as a machine. Our questions and our curiosity changes pretty dramatically when the mental picture starts to change.
Yeah. I was thinking of a history example to give, but I don't have to, because I think next episode it's going to be very clear why I don't have to, which is fun for me.
So like a weird history-based cliffhanger.
Yeah. I guess you got to come back to the next episode and hear me not say something about history, because you're going to learn why I don't have to in the next episode, because it's about complexity.
Perfect. That's what I was hoping was going to happen.
All right. That's it for this one. Thanks for listening. Talk again soon.
Well, that's it.
Yep. Another one in the books. We did it.
If you want to send us any of your thoughts, actually fling us any of your thoughts, you can do so at the website hoppodcast.com.
That's hoppodcast.com.
It's still such a stupid name.
It's such a stupid name. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for listening.